Bruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Pei Vav Amud Aleph, starting with Daf Pei Hey Amud Beis, 3 lines from the bottom. Our Mishnah stated that in regards to the carbon Pesach Koche Kalim, it's considered to be still able to be eaten inside of the walls, not just within the walls itself, but mina agaf v'lifnim is kilifnim. That means from the inner edge of the doorway, that itself is considered to be part of inside Yerushalayim, and one can eat the Korban Pesach there. However, mina agaf v'lachutz kilachutz, the Mishnah says, but the outer edge of the doorway has a din of being outside of the walls of Yerushalayim, and therefore, if the korban goes outside of the walls of Yerushalayim, it's going to be posel. The Gemara explained the agaf itself, that means the space, the area itself of the doorway. So it depends. In regards to Yerushalayim, it's not sanctified, but in regards to the Azara, the Shari Azarim, is considered to be Niskadesh. Says the Gemara, Omar Rav says, Gagin ve'aliyois loy niskadshu. The rooftops, as well as the upper chambers, they themselves are not niskadesh. Ask the Gemara, Eini, is that so? Ve'omar Rav, Mishum Rabbi Chia, Rav himself taught in Rabbi Chia, Kezeisa pischa v'halela poka igro, that there were enough of the chabura that they only had a kezayis each of the carbon Pesach, and they sang Hallel afterwards, which was required to say Hallel, and the Gemara understands it was on top of the roof, whereby it broke. It was as if it was broken, it was cracking the roof because of the voices of singing Hallel. We're on top of Pei Vav and Aleph. My lab, the achle be'igra va'ame be'igra. Is it not that they must have eaten the carbon Pesach on the roof? And they also then said Hallel on the roof, whereby we see that it's sanctified, because you can only eat the carbon Pesach in a place of Kedusha. Says Gemara Loy, the achli ba'ara va'amre be'igra. No, it was eaten on the ground, and it was then afterwards they came up on the rooftop, and they sang Hallel. Eini asked the Gemara, is that so? Vehatnan, it states in the Mishnah, Ein maftirin acha Pesach avikoymen. After eating the Korban Pesach, you can't then separate with an afikoymen. And explains Rav, Omar Rav, Shelo yaku mechabura chabura. Because you can't prepare, then taking your kleilim to another chabura, you might come to eat the Korban Pesach somewhere else. So we see from over here that even if you ate the Korban Pesach in the karka that we're saying now, in the aro, that you can't go up to the igra, to the roof afterwards, because that would be then maftirun acha pesach afikoymen. Lo kasha, the Gemara says not a kasha. Why? Because Omar Rav shelo yak, because kan b'shas achila, kan shelo b'shas achila. When does Rav say, and what does the Mishnah mean when it says maftirun acha pesach afikoymen? And Rav's concern, you can't go from chabura to chabura. It's talking b'shas the achila. But once you're finished with the achila, no problem. Therefore, over here they already ate the carbon pesach be'ara, and then they went up to the igra, to the roof, to then say Hallel. Toshma, the Gemara now asks on what Rav said, Gabe the aliyos as not being this Kaddish. Says the Gemara, Abba Shol Oimer, aliyos beis kodshe hakadoshim chamura mi beis kodshe hakadoshim. The aliyos, the upper area of the kodshe kadoshim is even more, has more sanctity than the Kodesh Kadashim itself, because Shabbos Kodesh Kadashim Kohen Gadol nichnas loy pam ach b'shana. The Kohen Gadol only enters there once a year on Yom Kippurim. Ve'aliyas Beis Kodesh Kadashim ein nichnasim lo elo pam achas b'shavua. Whereas when it comes to the aliyos of the Kodesh Kadashim, there the Kohen Gadol only enters enters once every 7 years. And some say twice every 7 years. Some say one enters there only once every 50 years, just to determine what it needs, if it needs any fixing. So we see lechara that the aliyahs indeed have sanctity. Omar Rav Yosef, Rav Yosef says, Meheichal nekum v'nesiv inish. From the heichal, a person is going to get up and ask a question. Shiny heichal is different. Tichsiv, it says in the pasuk, Vayitein David l'shlomo b'noi, that David gave to his son es tavnis ha'ulam, the preparations of the ulam, the esbotov, and the batim, the ganzakov, and the storage rooms, the aliyoisov, and the upper chambers, the chadorov, and the other rooms, hapnimis that are internal, ubeis hakapares, v'ksiv, and it says hakol b'ksav miyad Hashem. It was all written by the hand of Hashem, alai hiskil, which he gave them to me. In other words, over here, this was from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore over here it's different than heichal. So it's not a kasha on Rav that it has sanctity, but the regular aliyos could indeed not have be sanctified like Rav maintains. Toshma, the Gemara now asks further on Rav, halishkois habnuyois bekodesh upsuchois lechol. Those chambers that were built in the area of Kodesh and the Azara, and the opening is only can be gone through the opening from the Chol, meaning from the Harabayis, which in contrast to the Azara is Chol. So therefore, Toichein, the Mishnah says Chol, v'gagosein Kodesh. The inside thereby has the degree of Chol, like the entrance has, which is Harabayis. V'gagosein is Kodesh, but the rooftops have the degree of Kodesh. So we see a kasha on Rav, because Rav said they're not sanctified. Says the Gemara, no, Tirgama Rav Chizda explained, Bishe Gagoseim Shavin Lekarka Azara. The rooftops, they are level with the Azara, the ground of the Azara, and therefore just as the Azara is Kodesh, so too over here, these roofs are Kodesh. Ihochi asked the Gemara, if so, Ema Seifa. What are you going to say with the Seifa of the statement? It states, the opposite scenario, where it was built in the area of Chol, of the Harabayis. The opening, however, is only from the Azara, of where it's Kodesh. So therefore, Toichen Kodesh v'gagosein Chol. The inside, therefore, has the din of Kedusha as the Azara, its entrance, whereas the Gagois are Chol. Ask the Gemara, V'isal kedaitach, b'sheh Gagois sehen shavin lekarkos Azara, then havila mechila. If you're going to say that the rooftops are the ground of the Azara, then it comes out that these are tunnels. And Rabbi Yochanan said those tunnels are not niskadesh. Answers the more kikoma Rabbi Yochanan b'psuchos lahar habayis. That's when it's opening to the har habayis. Then they don't have any sanctity. These mechilos. Kitanya, what is this talking about? B'psuchos la'azara. Here we're talking about the entrances to the Azara. V'atanyo, Gemara asks further, Rabbi Yehuda oimer mechilos mitachas ha'heichal chol. Rabbi Yehuda says that the mechilos are underneath the heichal, which is chol. In other words, the Gemara understands at this point that the opening is to the Azara. If that's the case, then how can he say that indeed that is going to be then nas niskadesh? Tanya, Kitanya, the Gemara says, what are we talking about over here? Shepsuchos lechol. And echanami, it's not going to be sanctified like Azara. Not like you thought that it's opened up to the Azar and therefore it should be sanctified. No, it's opened up to the Chol, and therefore, since the Psuchos lechol, it only has the din of being Chol. Toshma, the Gemara now asks further on Rav. The Gagoy Kodesh, the end of the statement that Rabbi Yehuda just made in that Brisa, says the Gagoy Kodesh. The Gag over here of the Heichal is Kodesh. The Tizbara asked the Gemara, do you really think so? Do you really think so? V'hoktani, behold, it states, in other words, the kasha, how can you tell me that the Gag is not as Kaddish? It says over here in the end of this Brisa, the Gag is Kodesh. V'tizbara, do you really think so? Asked the Gemara, v'hoktani. It was taught, Gagin halolu. Ein oichlin sham kodshe kadoshim ve'ein shoichlin sham kodshim kalim. It says by the gagim, these gagim, which are both in the heichal and the azara, they cannot be eating the kodshe kadoshim, and you can't shecht kodshim kalim. Ve'elakasha gag, in which case, ve'elakasha gaga kodesh, then that's going to be difficult to what we just said before in the Brisa, that gaga is kodesh. If you can't shecht the kodshe kalim, and you cannot eat kodshe kadoshim, it must be that it doesn't have kedusha. Yet we just said in the end of the brisa that gago is kodesh. Says Gemara Amar Chamo Bar Guryo Lo Oisin Beis Amos. That which it's saying that the gago is kodesh is talking about using storage for certain kelim that are an amos each, 2 different kelim that have an amo. This not like it says in the following Mishnah. There are beis amos hayu b'shushan habira. There are 2 different kelim that have the size of an amma each that was stored in the shushan habira. That was one of the areas over there, one of the rooms. Achas al keren mizrachis tzafoinis. One was stored on the northeastern corner. The achas al keren mizrachis jorim. And the other one was the southeastern corner. Zusha al keren mizrachis tzafoinis. The one that was stored on the northeastern corner, that was more than Moshe Rabbeinu's Amma of 24 and 24 etzba'os, because this one had an extra half of etzba. In other words, you have 6 gudolim times 4 gudolim. No, 6 gudolim, that gives you an amma. 4 amos, therefore, is 24 etzbas, 24 gudolim, 24 etzbas. That's Moshe Rabbeinu's measurement. And this was 1/2 of a etzba more, slightly greater than the amma of Moshe Rabbeinu. V'zusha al keren mizrachis. And this one that was stored on the southeastern corner was 1/2 etzba greater than this one. That means it was 25 etzbois to the amma. Nim says Yisrael shel Moshe etzba. Now this Moshe Rabbeinu, again, his was 24 etzba, because it was 4 times 6. 6 etzbos times 4. 6 etzbos times 4 was 4 tefachim, would give you 24, and this is an additional etzba, so it's 25. So this amma was 25, 1 etzba greater than the amma of Moshe Rabbeinu. So there's 2 different kelim, one was 24.5, one was 25.5 in its amma. Why was one big and one small? In other words, why didn't the amos be the same measurement as the Amma of Moshe Rabbeinu? Why weren't they both 24? Says the Gemara, because they would have the craftsmen, they would take out 24, meaning that would be the determined type of work that they were supposed to do based on that Amma of 24. However, they were machzirin begedoilo, and they would return slightly more. Why? So therefore, the price that they would be getting for their labor would be for 24, and they would provide slightly greater in their work. So they wouldn't then have any problem of me'ila using the sanctity of whatever it is that they're making. V'tarti lamali. So why do we have to have the 2 different kelim? One that was only 24.5, and one was 25. Just do 24.5. Says Gemara, no achas lekasba v'dahava v'achas lebinyana. When it came to then making silver and gold, so then the 24.5 was good enough, because the material is very expensive, and therefore we wouldn't want to cause the craftsman too much of a loss. However, the binyana, when he would make a structure, that was used with an amma of 25 etzbois. Tnan. Now the Gemara turns to our Mishnah and states, Tnan, which says in the Sefer of our Mishnah that the windows and the thickness of the wall, that means on top of the wall itself, they had the sanctity of being lifnim. So bishlam achalanos mishkachas lo shavi lekarka azora. We can understand why the chalonos could be considered to be fnim, because they have the same level as the azara. That could be such a case. How can the thickness of the wall, that means on top of the wall, that have the same sanctity as lifnim? Answers the Gemara, mishkachas lo bebar shura. We can find it on what's called the low wall. The Chsiv, it says in the pasuk, vayavel chel v'choima, and he will cause the chel and the choima, the low wall and the high wall, to be in mourning. Rab Chiranina explains, shura ubar shura. Chel is considered to be the bar shura, the small wall. The choima is the large wall. That means that the wall had in it a small wall that was connected to it, and that itself is what we're referring to over here, whereby from the small wall you can have the thickness of that small wall would be indeed kilifnim.